A janitor watched an executive steal his designs and his future until the CEO demanded the real genius step forward. What happens when the invisible man lays his notebook on the boardroom table? The boardroom buzzed with energy as executives shifted in their seats, voices rising and falling like waves. The long glass table gleamed under the overhead lights, stacks of papers scattered across it, charts and prototypes flashing on the big screen. At the head of the room sat Victor Hale, the CEO, his sharp eyes narrowing as he held up a set of design drafts. The room quieted instantly, everyone waiting for his judgment. He tapped the edge of the pages against the table, his cufflinks catching the light, and said in a steady voice, "These designs are unlike anything our team has produced before. The detail, the innovation, the vision." He paused, letting the silence hang. "I want to know, who made this?" The executives exchanged quick glances, some clearing their throats nervously, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. No one wanted to be caught off guard, yet no one wanted to miss the chance for credit either. Finally, Miles Harrington, the ambitious vice president with a smile as polished as his shoes, leaned forward. "That would be the work of Jordan, our lead designer," he announced smoothly, gesturing toward the young man at the far end of the table. Jordan, caught by surprise, straightened in his chair, his face flushing red as he nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I've been refining that concept for weeks," he added, trying to sound confident. A ripple of approval ran through the room. The CEO gave a single nod, though his eyes remained sharp, scanning every face as if testing their honesty. He leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers against the armrest. "You're telling me this came from you?" he said slowly, his gaze fixed on Jordan. "Yes, sir," Jordan repeated, his voice steadier this time. Around him, the other executives murmured their agreement, each one eager to confirm the story. Hale gave a thin smile. "Good, then deliver me more work at this level," he ordered, tossing the papers onto the table. The executives erupted into chatter again, praising the brilliance of the design, talking over one another to align themselves with what they believed would be the company's next breakthrough. In the back of the room, almost invisible, Darius Cole moved quietly with his cleaning cart. He polished the glass walls with steady motions, his reflection blending into the background. His uniform was plain, his head slightly bowed, and no one spared him more than a passing glance. Yet his eyes lingered on the designs still spread across the table. He knew every line, every curve, every detail, because they were his. The sketches had been his late nights poured into paper, his old notebook filled with ideas scribbled after double shifts, his imagination given shape during hours when the world assumed he was only a janitor. But now they were here, on glossy paper in the hands of men who laughed too loud and claimed too much. Darius kept his cloth moving, his face expressionless. The room roared with false credit and blind ambition, yet no one noticed the quiet man who had drawn the future with a pencil he could barely afford. He remained unseen, the true designer, hidden in plain sight. The CEO's voice cut through the chatter like a blade, his words cold and sharp. "We can't have amateurs in design," he said, letting the sentence hang in the air for everyone to hear. A burst of laughter rolled through the room, some of it nervous, some of it mocking, the kind of laughter that people used to prove they belonged on the inside. Executives leaned back in their chairs, smirks flashing across their faces as if the remark was a private joke shared only among them. Jordan laughed too, a little too loudly, eager to hold his place in the spotlight. Miles Harrington added, "That's right, sir. The work we're doing requires years of training. No outsider could ever manage this level of complexity." The group nodded in agreement, each one trying to appear loyal, each one blind to the truth, standing just a few feet away. At the back of the room, Darius Cole gripped his mop tighter, his knuckles whitening as he twisted the handle unconsciously. His face remained still, trained into the mask he had worn for years, the mask that kept him invisible. His uniform blended into the sterile walls, his presence reduced to the background hum of cleaning supplies and polished glass. No one noticed his eyes flicker toward the stack of designs spread across the polished table. No one noticed the flicker of recognition or the hurt he quickly buried beneath calm silence. The laughter stung, but not because he had expected any different. He knew what they thought of men like him, men who pushed carts instead of contracts, men whose names never appeared on business cards or office doors. Hidden in the bottom of his cart, wrapped in an old cloth to keep it safe from water and cleaning chemicals, lay his worn notebook. The leather cover was scratched, the pages filled with sketches drawn in pencil and ink, smudged with fingerprints from long nights hunched over a kitchen table. Every shoe, every curve, every line inside that book carried his signature style, a design language he had built from the streets he grew up on, from the rhythm of basketball courts, from the hum of subway tunnels, from the quiet strength of his late father's advice. That notebook was his true portfolio, but in this room, it was hidden like a secret too fragile to share. The executives continued to laugh, their voices echoing off the glass walls as if they had already forgotten the question the CEO had asked. The moment had passed, and Jordan wore the credit like a badge, though the weight of it did not belong to him. Darius bent down to wring his mop, his movements steady, his expression controlled. He had learned long ago that showing emotion in rooms like this gave people an excuse to crush you harder. Still, as he dipped the mop back into the bucket, a quiet fire stirred in his chest. The CEO had dismissed the idea of amateurs, but what he had failed to understand was that vision did not come from titles or degrees. It came from the mind of someone who saw what others could not. Darius kept his head down, but inside, a voice whispered that one day they would all see. Years earlier, Darius Cole walked the halls of Parsons School of Design with a sketchbook under his arm and hope burning bright in his chest. Professors stopped him in corridors to praise his work. Classmates borrowed his ideas for inspiration, and visiting designers from major brands singled him out as someone to watch. His drawings had energy, not just clean lines, but stories in every curve, sneakers that seemed ready to leap off the page, jackets that carried rhythm in their stitching, furniture that looked like it belonged in museums. For a time, it seemed the world was finally opening to him, and he carried the pride of his family on his shoulders. His father would call him every night, his voice tired after long shifts at the factory but filled with pride, saying, "You're building what I never could, son. Keep going." Then the sudden phone call came, the kind that changes everything. His father had collapsed at work, the weight of years of labor and quiet sacrifice crushing him without warning. By the time Darius reached the hospital, it was too late. His mother wept in a corner chair, clutching her apron, while the doctor explained heart failure in words that felt cold and distant. The funeral came quickly, and so did the bills. Without his father's income, the rent fell behind, food became scarce, and the scholarship that once felt solid slipped like sand between his fingers. He tried to juggle 2 part-time jobs while attending classes, cleaning tables in a diner at night and hauling boxes at a warehouse on weekends, but exhaustion dulled his focus and assignments piled up unfinished. One meeting with the dean sealed his fate. Without the ability to pay tuition or keep his grades high enough, he would have to withdraw. Darius remembered carrying his sketchbook out of the building that final day, the winter air sharp against his skin, watching other students hurry to class with coffee cups in hand, while his future crumbled silently. He told himself it would only be temporary, that he would return once money was saved. But weeks turned into months, and survival pressed heavier each day. The jobs changed, but the struggle remained. He stocked shelves, pushed brooms, and polished floors in offices where executives never bothered to learn his name. Every night he returned to his small apartment, sitting at the kitchen table with his notebook, sketching by the dim light of a single bulb. His talent did not fade, but it hid beneath the grind of survival, unseen by the world that had once called him promising. His friends from school moved on to internships, portfolios, and design showcases, while his life shrank to rent payments, utility bills, and his mother's quiet grief. Still, he held onto his sketchbook like a lifeline. Each page was a piece of the dream he refused to let die, even as reality forced him further from it. In the silence of those nights, Darius whispered to himself, "One day, these designs will matter. One day, someone will see." Darius remembered those nights with a clarity that made his chest tighten. Nights when the world seemed both heavy and full of possibility. After long hours at the warehouse, he would walk home through quiet streets, the hum of the city softened by darkness. Streetlights glowed amber above him, casting circles of light on cracked pavement. And in those circles he would stop, pull out his sketchbook, and start drawing. Sneakers mostly, the kind he could never afford as a kid. Sneakers with soles shaped for speed, with patterns inspired by city skylines, with laces that crossed like musical notes on a page. His pencil scratched against paper, while the night air cooled his skin, and for a moment, exhaustion gave way to creation. His notebook became his only audience, the pages filling with lines that carried the rhythm of his imagination, silent but alive. When he finally reached home, his mother would be waiting, her eyes tired but her smile unwavering. She would sit at the kitchen table, watching as he bent over the book again under the dim bulb that flickered above them. She had always been his first cheerleader, even when the world showed no interest in his gift. "You were born to build things, son," she would say, her voice soft but sure, like a prayer spoken aloud. She had grown up sewing clothes for her brothers and sisters back in Georgia, and she understood the way hands could create futures out of fabric and thread, or in Darius's case, out of pencil strokes and bold ideas. He would show her sketches of shoes shaped like the arc of a bridge, or jackets cut to mimic the wings of birds, and though she did not know the technical terms, she nodded with pride and certainty. She saw what others refused to see, not just drawings, but the soul of a designer in every line. Those quiet nights kept him moving forward, even when the weight of bills and the ache of disappointment pressed down on him. Sometimes, after she had gone to bed, he would keep sketching until dawn, the notebook open on his lap, as the city stirred awake outside the window. The sound of early buses rumbling past mixed with the scratch of his pencil, and he told himself that one day the world would see what his mother already knew. He treated that notebook as if it were gold, wrapping it carefully in cloth before slipping it back into his bag each morning. He never let it out of his sight, never allowed anyone else to touch it. It was more than paper. It was a lifeline, the single place where his dream had not been stolen or dismissed. Though his hands were calloused from mops and boxes, his sketches carried elegance, proof that beauty could rise out of struggle. Each page became a reminder that he was more than invisible labor, more than the uniform he wore. In that notebook, his future was waiting to be discovered. Darius had never planned to be noticed, at least not directly. Years of being overlooked had taught him that the safest way to survive was to move like a shadow, quiet and invisible. Yet the fire inside him refused to go out. Every night when the offices emptied and silence settled over the glass towers, he would take out his notebook and trace new ideas, lines flowing across the page as if his hand knew a future his life had not yet reached. The problem was, those pages stayed hidden, locked in his cart, guarded like treasure. One evening, without thinking too much, he tore a page from the back, a quick sketch of a shoe with layered soles shaped like city steps. He dropped it in the trash bin of the design floor, covered by discarded drafts. It was an impulse, a quiet test, almost like tossing a message into the ocean to see if it might float. The next week, he noticed something strange. On the whiteboard in the design studio, that same layered sole appeared, redrawn in cleaner lines, adjusted with technical notes. The junior designer, a quiet young woman named Claire, had been sorting through the bins when she discovered it. She did not know whose hand had created the image, but she could tell it carried vision, Hungry for recognition herself, she had presented it to her team, claiming she had found inspiration late one night. No one questioned her. They were simply grateful for fresh ideas. Darius began leaving more. Not every night. Not too often. But enough to see a pattern. A heel shaped like a skyline curve. A tread inspired by raindrops on glass. A stitch design that mimicked subway lines. Each sketch, slipped silently into the wastebasket, became a seed that sprouted weeks later on conference tables and in prototypes. Claire rose quietly in the ranks, praised for her resourcefulness, while the executives applauded what they believed was innovation from within their own team. Darius said nothing. He continued to mop floors and polish glass, watching his designs take shape in the hands of others. It was a strange mix of pride and pain, knowing the world admired what it thought belonged to someone else. The day the CEO waved those designs before the board, demanding to know their source, Darius felt the sharp weight of irony pressing down on him. They were his. Every line born in the small hours when exhaustion should have carried him to sleep, but instead gave way to creation. Yet no one in that glittering room would ever imagine the truth, that a janitor had built the foundation of their so-called groundbreaking concept. He gripped his mop, forcing himself to keep his face blank, though inside, anger and longing battled for space. He had slipped those sketches into the trash to prove to himself that they mattered, that someone would see them, but he had never imagined they would travel so far without his name. The tension in the boardroom grew heavy as the CEO stood, his voice cutting through the noise with a sharp finality. "We need the true designer in 72 hours, or this project is dead." His words echoed off the glass walls, leaving no space for argument. The executives, who had been laughing only moments before, now shifted uncomfortably, glances darting between one another like startled birds. The groundbreaking concept that had earned so much excitement now hung in the balance, and every person in the room understood that failure would mean more than embarrassment. Investors were waiting, deadlines loomed, and the CEO's patience was notoriously thin. He dropped the papers back onto the table, his eyes scanning the group with quiet menace. "If I find out anyone has lied about this work, there will be consequences." Miles Harrington leaned forward quickly, his smile practiced, though his jaw tightened beneath it. "Sir, there is no doubt the design came from within our team," he said, his voice dripping with confidence he did not feel. "Jordan here has already confirmed it." Jordan nodded, though the flush in his cheeks betrayed his unease. The CEO gave a long stare, then tapped the table once, the sound like a gavel in a courtroom. 72 hours, he repeated, then left the room with his assistant trailing behind. The door closed, and silence collapsed over the table. The moment the CEO was gone, the executives erupted into frantic whispers. "If he finds out Jordan didn't create this, we're finished," one muttered. Another snapped back, "Then we make sure he believes it." Claire sat quietly, her face pale, realizing the sketches she had claimed as her own inspiration were now being demanded at a higher level. Miles leaned back in his chair, already calculating. "Listen," he said firmly, "the CEO doesn't care who drew what. He cares about results. We polish what we have, we create variations, we make it look like Jordan's vision is real." Panic rippled through the group. Some argued they should outsource for help. Others feared leaking the design would ruin their competitive edge. But none of them dared confess the truth, that the foundation of the work had come from a notebook no one in that room had ever seen, belonging to a man none of them considered. At the back, silent as ever, Darius emptied a trash bin, his movements steady, his face calm. He heard every word, the urgency, the fear, the greed. His chest tightened as he realized what was happening. They had stolen his designs, and now they were drowning under the weight of their own lies. Yet no one looked at him. No one thought to connect the dots. To them, he was invisible, a shadow with a mop, not the hand that had sketched the future they were so desperate to save. He kept his head down, though his heart pounded against his ribs. 72 hours until the project collapsed. 72 hours until his eviction notice took effect. Time, for once, was not their only enemy. It was his as well. The night air was cool as Darius sat at the bus stop, the streetlight buzzing faintly above him. His shift was over, but his thoughts refused to rest. The notebook lay open on his lap, pages curled from years of use, sketches staring back at him like voices from another life. He traced one with his finger, the outline of a sneaker he had drawn months ago, its lines sharp and confident, its design unlike anything the company's so-called experts could imagine. "This is my chance," he whispered, the words barely audible, carried away by the wind that swept down the empty street. His voice trembled not from cold but from the weight of possibility. For a moment, he allowed himself to see it. Walking into that boardroom, standing tall, placing the notebook on the table, and declaring himself the real designer. He imagined the shock on their faces, the silence that would follow, the CEO finally realizing the truth. The thought burned bright, almost intoxicating, yet it quickly dimmed as doubt pressed against him. He remembered the interviews he had once attended, dressed in a borrowed suit, his sketches carefully arranged in a thin portfolio. He remembered the way recruiters glanced at his resume, their eyes catching on the blank space where a degree should have been, their polite smiles tightening as they told him, "Thank you, we'll be in touch." He remembered walking out of sleek office lobbies with his heart sinking, knowing the call would never come. Worse still were the times he had been dismissed before even sitting down, the quick glances at his skin, the subtle looks that carried unspoken judgments, the comments about fit and culture that stung without being said outright. He had learned to smile, to thank them, to leave quietly, but the humiliation had carved itself into his memory. Each rejection had whispered the same message: "You don't belong here." He closed his notebook now, clutching it tightly, the leather warm against his palm. The bus rumbled closer, its headlights cutting through the dark, but Darius barely noticed. His mind was caught between hunger and fear. If he revealed himself, maybe he could finally step into the life he had dreamed of, the life his mother had always believed he was meant for. Yet if he tried and failed, he could lose everything: his job, his last shred of stability, the small paycheck that kept the lights on, and his mother's medicine within reach. The risk felt enormous, almost impossible. He leaned back on the bench, staring at the night sky, searching for an answer in its vastness. As the bus doors hissed open, he slid the notebook back into his bag, its edges frayed from years of being carried but never shown. He stepped aboard, moving down the aisle to an empty seat, whispering to himself again, softer this time, almost as if afraid of being heard, "This is my chance." The words lingered, heavy with both hope and doubt, a fragile balance he could not yet tip. The hum of machines filled the design lab that night, faint blue lights from computer screens glowing against the walls. Darius moved quietly with his mop, the soft squeak of wheels on his cart the only sound besides the steady rhythm of his breathing. He had walked these halls so many nights that he knew the layout as well as his own apartment. Every desk, every blueprint, every scattered prototype had become part of the invisible world he lived in. Tonight, as he emptied trash bins, his eyes caught on a pair of sneakers laid out near the drafting table. Something about them made him pause. He bent closer, pretending to wipe the surface, and saw a glaring mistake. The label under the prototype listed the wrong material, one that would never hold under stress testing. Anyone who knew design could see it immediately, and Darius knew if it made it past this stage, the team would lose hours, maybe even days, correcting the error. He felt his heart quicken as he reached into his pocket for a sticky note. His pencil hovered over it for a moment before he began to write, his handwriting neat from years of careful sketching. He corrected the label, explained briefly why the original choice would fail, and suggested the right material with a confidence that came naturally when he spoke through his pen instead of his voice. For a moment, he hesitated. Leaving the note would be dangerous. If someone saw his name, Questions would follow, and he had no answers that would protect him. So he signed only with his initials, DC, and pressed the note gently to the side of the prototype before wheeling his cart out of the lab as though nothing had happened. By morning, the design floor buzzed with confusion. Darius, polishing glass just outside the conference room, overheard voices rising with urgency. "Someone found this note," one designer said, holding it up. "It saved us from a huge setback," another added. They were already behind schedule, and the correction had put them back on track. Executives gathered around, examining the sticky note as though it were a mysterious clue left behind by a ghost. "Who is DC?" they wondered, flipping the paper over as if the answer might be hidden on the back. But the moment of mystery did not last long. Miles Harrington stepped forward, his tone smooth and confident. "That was me," he announced, plucking the note from the designer's hand. "Just a shorthand I use." He tucked the paper into his jacket pocket, his smile calm but his eyes sharp with calculation. Relief spread across the room. "Of course," someone said. "That makes sense." Credit shifted instantly, the small victory claimed before anyone else could speak. Darius watched from the hallway, his cloth moving in slow circles against the glass. The fire that had flickered in him the night before now burned lower, the taste of injustice bitter on his tongue. He had dared to test the waters, dared to let his hand be seen, even if only through two initials. Yet, once again, the recognition slipped from him, stolen before it could even reach his name. The hallway was quiet, except for the distant hum of printers and the echo of footsteps on polished floors. Darius pushed his cart slowly, his shoulders heavy with the fatigue of another long night. He was almost at the stairwell when a voice cut through the silence. "Well, well, if it isn't the ghost in the building." Darius froze, his grip tightening on the handle of the cart. Miles Harrington stepped out from the shadows near the conference room, his suit sharp, his smile sharper. In his hand, he held the worn leather notebook, its corners bent, its pages fanned slightly, as if he had been flipping through it. Darius's stomach dropped. "Quite an imagination for a janitor," Miles said smoothly, lifting the book like a prize. Shoes that look like bridges, jackets that mimic birds, patterns pulled from subways and skylines. "Remarkable, really, though I doubt anyone would believe they came from you." He snapped the cover shut with a flick of his wrist, the sound echoing too loudly in the narrow hall. Darius stepped forward, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's mine, give it back." Miles smirked, holding the book out of reach. "Ownership is such a flexible word, isn't it? From where I'm standing, this is nothing more than doodles in a notebook. And I'd hate for management to think you've been stealing company time to scribble instead of clean." Darius clenched his jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. But Miles's next words cut deeper. "Stay invisible," he warned, his tone colder now, "or I'll make sure you're fired by the end of the week." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice, his Harvard ring tapping lightly against the notebook's cover. "You've lasted here this long by being unseen. Don't ruin it now. People like you don't get second chances in places like this." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. The silence charged. Darius could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, the weight of his father's memory pressing against him, the echo of his mother's words reminding him of his gift. He wanted to snatch the book from Miles's hand, to shout the truth loud enough for the whole building to hear, but the threat hung like a chain around his neck. Fired meant no paycheck, no medicine for his mother, no roof over their heads. Miles knew it, and he was savoring the power. Finally, with a mocking chuckle, Miles slid the notebook under his arm. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll make sure some of these ideas see the light of day. Of course, no one will ever know your name was attached to them." Then he walked away, his shoes clicking confidently against the marble floor, leaving Darius standing frozen beside his cart. His fists were clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms, his chest heavy with rage and helplessness. The notebook, the one place where his dream still lived, was gone. For the first time in years, He felt truly exposed, the walls closing in around him, the threat of erasure sharper than any insult. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds of Darius's small apartment, casting stripes of light across the peeling paint of the walls. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bright orange paper taped to the door. The word "final" seemed to burn into his eyes, the eviction notice impossible to ignore. He had known it was coming. The late rent notices had piled up for months, but seeing it in bold print left his chest hollow. The landlord had slipped it under the door without knocking, as if too tired of excuses to bother hearing another. Darius reached for it, his hand trembling, then let it fall back to the table where unpaid bills already crowded every inch. Beside the eviction notice lay another envelope, opened but unread, from the pharmacy. His mother's medication bill had doubled again, the balance now higher than he earned in 2 weeks of work. He rubbed his temples, closing his eyes, picturing her sitting in the worn armchair in the next room, coughing softly in her sleep, unaware of how close the ground was to falling out from beneath them. He had promised her safety after his father's death, promised he would carry the weight his father had left behind, but the numbers mocked him. Rent overdue, utilities past due, medication out of reach. It was a cruel equation he could never solve. He opened his notebook, the edges frayed from years of being carried, the pages filled with sketches that no one had ever seen. Each line represented a possibility, each page a door to a future that had never opened. For years, he had told himself it was enough to dream in silence, to let his designs live in private. But now, silence was killing him. His job kept him fed, but barely. His invisibility kept him safe, but only until now. What use was safety if it ended with his family on the street, his mother's medicine cut off, his father's memory tarnished by failure? Darius picked up his pencil, holding it tight as if it were more than wood and graphite, as if it were a weapon, sharp enough to cut through the walls that kept him hidden. He sketched furiously, his hand moving faster than his thoughts. Sneakers with bold lines, jackets with sharp silhouettes, designs that spoke of movement and strength. The pencil left smudges across his fingers, the pages piling up with proof that he was more than a janitor, more than a shadow. His breath came hard, each stroke of the pencil louder in his ears than the noise of despair. Finally he dropped the pencil, staring at the black lines stretching across the paper. His chest rose and fell as if he had run a race. "No more hiding," he whispered, the words slipping past his lips with a weight that made them real. No more silence, no more stolen credit, no more watching others climb ladders built on his imagination. The eviction notice still glared at him, the bills still lay in piles, but something inside him had shifted. He was done being invisible. The boardroom filled again with the hum of voices, the air thick with tension as the executives gathered around the long glass table. Charts glowed on the screen at the far end, prototypes lined up along the shelves, but none of it mattered as much as the question hanging in the air. The CEO entered with his usual deliberate steps, his sharp gaze scanning the room until silence fell. He held up the same set of designs, his tone clipped and demanding. "I asked before, and I'll ask again, who is the true designer of this work? I want the truth, and I want it now." His words sliced through the quiet like a blade, and a nervous shuffle passed down the line of executives. Jordan shifted in his seat, Miles Harrington adjusted his cufflinks, and Claire kept her eyes fixed on the table, all of them waiting for someone else to answer. Darius stood in the back as always, his cart beside him, mop leaning against the wall. He had come to clean the glass, but his chest thudded with a rhythm louder than his heartbeat. He thought of the eviction notice taped to his door, his mother's pale face as she swallowed her medicine, the pencil he had gripped the night before, with fire in his hand. The words rose inside him like a tide, and for the first time, he did not push them back down. He stepped forward, his voice calm, steady, but firm. "You're looking at him." The room froze, every head snapping toward him, eyes wide with disbelief. Gasps rippled through the boardroom, sharp intakes of breath cutting the silence. The CEO's brows furrowed, his sharp eyes narrowing as if he had misheard. "Excuse me." Darius held his ground, his back straight, his voice clear. "I'm the designer. Those sketches, those prototypes, they came from me." The reaction was instant. Harrington shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the polished floor. "Impossible!" he barked, his face flushing with anger. "This man cleans floors. He doesn't design shoes. He doesn't belong in this room, let alone claim credit for work of this level." His words dripped with fury, but beneath it there was fear, the kind of fear that cracked the mask of control he always wore. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, caught between ridicule and doubt. The janitor's voice had not wavered. His presence carried more certainty than they expected. The CEO leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his gaze never leaving Darius. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that these designs came from you, not from my team?" Darius nodded once. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Harrington laughed harshly, shaking his head. "He's delusional. This is nothing more than a stunt." But even as he spoke, a flicker of unease crossed his eyes, knowing that Darius had already seen too much, corrected too much, revealed too much for it to be dismissed easily. The silence that followed was thick with possibility, the balance of power shifting in a way no one in that room could ignore. The silence in the room deepened as Darius reached for the worn notebook tucked under his arm. His fingers brushed the cracked leather cover, the same notebook that had carried him through sleepless nights and forgotten bus rides, the one place where his dreams had never been stolen. He laid it on the table with a steady hand, the soft thud echoing like a challenge. Then he flipped it open, turning page after page, sketches spilling out like a hidden river finally breaking free. Shoes with layered soles, jackets with curved seams, intricate details of materials and stitching, every design sharper and bolder than the prototypes lined up on the shelves. Gasps escaped from the executives as their eyes darted between the notebook and the models they had praised only days before. The resemblance was undeniable, but more than that, the notebook held improvements, refinements that pushed the designs beyond anything they had yet seen. Darius lifted a page, his voice calm but edged with fire as he began to speak. "This sole design," he said, tapping the drawing, "you're using a material blend that will fail under pressure. Look here. I adjusted the layers to absorb impact and increase durability." He moved to another page. "And this tread pattern, you copied it directly, but you missed the spacing. Without the right ratio, it won't hold traction in wet conditions." His words flowed with certainty, each explanation slicing through the doubt that had filled the air. These weren't guesses, they were facts, the kind of details only the original designer could know. The executives shifted uneasily in their seats, murmurs rippling through the group. Claire bit her lip, recognizing the truth in every correction. Jordan sat pale and stiff, the false credit crumbling around him. Harrington stood rigid, his jaw tight, eyes narrowing as Darius turned page after page, exposing not just inspiration but mastery. Darius's voice grew stronger as he spoke, his confidence no longer hidden. "Every line in this book was drawn by my hand. Every concept here was born long before they appeared in your labs. You call this innovation, but these designs are my life." The CEO leaned forward, his eyes locked on the sketches, his fingers tapped against the table, slow and deliberate, betraying the calculations behind his sharp gaze. He studied Darius not with the dismissive glance he once gave the janitor, but with the wary respect of a man recognizing value. Finally, he asked, "How long have you been working on these?" Darius met his gaze without flinching. "Years," he said. "Every night after shifts, every morning, before the city woke." The fire in his voice carried weight, too steady to be doubted, too precise to be ignored. Harrington tried to laugh, but the sound fell flat, drowned out by the undeniable evidence spread across the table. The room no longer saw a cleaner with a mop. They saw a designer with proof, and the truth burned too brightly to be hidden again. The CEO leaned forward, elbows pressing into the polished glass table, his eyes sharp as they studied Darius with a new weight. The room was silent, every executive holding their breath as if waiting for someone else to speak first. "You're telling me," he said slowly, his voice low but dangerous, "that my executives built their reputations on your work?" His words rolled like thunder, measured but heavy. He let them hang in the air, daring anyone to deny it. No one moved, no one spoke. The silence itself was confirmation. Darius stood tall, his notebook still open before him, sketches spread like evidence in a trial. His face was steady, his voice calm. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. These designs, these prototypes, they were born in my notebook, night after night, long before your team ever laid eyes on them." He glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had stolen his ideas, those who had looked through him for years. None of them dared to return his gaze for long. Some shifted uncomfortably, some stared at the floor, and others tried to appear busy with their papers. The CEO's eyes narrowed, scanning each face at the table. His tone sharpened. "So you all let me believe this brilliance came from within my team, when the truth was sitting in the back of this very room with a mop and a bucket." The accusation struck like a whip. Claire swallowed hard, her lips pressed together. Jordan's hands trembled as he fiddled with a pen. Miles Harrington sat rigid, his jaw tight, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple. Finally, the CEO's gaze settled on Harrington. "You vouched for this, Miles. You told me it was Jordan's vision." Harrington forced a smile, but his voice cracked under the pressure. "Of course, sir. I thought the work had been a team effort. You know how these things are. Inspiration gets shared around." He reached for his glass of water, his fingers shaking just enough for the glass to clink against the table. The CEO's expression hardened. Inspiration is one thing. Theft is another. The weight of exposure pressed down on Harrington, his confidence unraveling under the scrutiny. He tugged at his collar, his forehead damp. Darius watched him, not with triumph, but with the steady calm of someone who had waited too long for the truth to surface. The silence from the rest of the executives only deepened the blow. No one stepped in to defend Harrington. No one dared share his burden. His power, built on lies, was crumbling in real time, and everyone in the room could see it. The CEO leaned back slowly, his eyes never leaving Darius. His voice dropped quieter, more deliberate. "I underestimated you." He turned sharply to the others. "And I overestimated all of you." The message was clear, the balance of the room shifting. For the first time, the janitor was no longer invisible. For the first time, the thief was sweating under the weight of truth. The room held its breath as the CEO leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes fixed on Darius. Every executive at the table waited for the explosion, the dismissal, the order for security to escort the janitor out. Instead, Victor Hale folded his hands and spoke with a calm that carried more weight than shouting ever could. "Design for me, officially," he said, his tone measured. "Deliver work at this level, and I'll pay you what they earn in a year." The words struck the room like lightning, disbelief sparking in every corner. Claire's eyes widened, Jordan shifted nervously, and Harrington's face tightened with rage. Darius did not move at first. The offer was tempting. More money than he had ever dreamed of. Enough to erase eviction notices and hospital bills with one stroke. Yet he had learned too well the danger of accepting without conditions. He thought of his father, loyal for 15 years, only to be discarded overnight. He thought of his mother, coughing quietly in the next room at home, waiting for medicine they could barely afford. He thought of Harrington, still clutching power, waiting for his chance to strike back. Darius knew better than to step into a deal unprotected. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice calm but steady. "But if I'm going to do this, it has to be on terms that guarantee my safety." He closed his notebook with deliberate care, letting the sound echo in the room like a gavel. "I want the offer in writing, signed and sealed." I want protection from retaliation, not just from those in this room, but from anyone in the company who would try to push me out." His eyes flicked toward Harrington, whose scowl deepened. "And I want my mother's medical coverage included. She has prescriptions that are not optional, and I will not risk losing her care." The executives exchanged shocked glances. It was one thing for a janitor to reveal hidden talent, another for him to negotiate like an equal. Harrington scoffed, his voice sharp. "This is ridiculous. He's in no position to demand anything." But Hale raised a hand, silencing him without a word. The CEO's eyes stayed locked on Darius, studying him like a puzzle. "You drive a hard bargain," he said finally. "But that's the language I respect. Boldness, precision." He glanced at his assistant. "Draw up the contract. Full protections, medical benefits included. Make sure it's airtight." The executives shifted uncomfortably, their hierarchy shaken. Darius had come into the room a cleaner, but now he stood as something entirely different. Someone who dared to claim value and back it with proof. Harrington clenched his fists under the table, his face red with fury, but his voice was silenced by the authority of the deal. Darius breathed slowly, his hand brushing the cover of his notebook, feeling its weight. For the first time, he was not begging for scraps or hiding in shadows. For the first time, he had negotiated his worth and won. The weeks that followed moved like a storm. But for the first time, Darius was not caught in its winds. He was steering them. The contract had been signed, his demands met in writing, and his mother's prescriptions were finally covered, without fear of interruption. He no longer carried eviction notices in his pocket, like weights dragging him down. Instead, he carried tools, access, and resources he had never been allowed near before. The design lab that once locked him out now opened its doors wide, placing material samples, cutting-edge software, and prototype machines in his hands. He worked with an intensity that startled even himself, sketching through the night, then refining through the day, every stroke of his pencil sharpened by years of hidden practice. The executives watched from the sidelines, some resentful, some stunned, as he took raw concepts and shaped them into living, breathing designs. The final prototype came together under his direction, a shoe unlike anything on the market, its lines sleek, its structure strong, its comfort unmatched. Every stitch carried both science and art. Every curve whispered of the story he had been forced to keep silent for years. Engineers tested it, expecting flaws, but walked away, shaking their heads in disbelief. Investors were flown in to witness the unveiling, their tailored suits crowding the conference hall, their eyes skeptical at first, then wide with awe as they held the finished product in their hands. The numbers on their charts could not capture the weight of what they felt. Here was something that would change the industry. When the CEO stepped to the podium that afternoon, flashes from cameras cut through the room, reporters eager for a headline. He lifted the prototype high, his voice carrying authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you are looking at the future of design, created by the man who stands beside me, Mr. Darius Cole." For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the sound of Darius's name echoing where laughter had once filled the space. Executives who had mocked him sat frozen, some pale with disbelief, others clapping hesitantly, forced into recognition. The investors rose to their feet, applause swelling, not for the CEO or the board, but for the man they now saw as the heart of innovation. Darius stood there in a simple suit, not the uniform of a janitor, his notebook still tucked under his arm. He bowed his head slightly, his voice calm but steady as he said thank you, though inside he felt more than gratitude. He felt justice, long overdue. The faces that had once looked through him now faced him with respect, whether grudging or genuine. Cameras captured the moment, broadcasting it far beyond the room. The story of the janitor turned designer spread like wildfire, investors calling it genius, the public calling it inspiring. Darius knew this was only the beginning, but it was the turning point he had fought for in silence. No longer invisible, he had placed his name where it belonged, carved into the very designs that would define the future. 6 months later, the city skyline stretched wide beyond the tall windows of Darius's new office, the morning light reflecting off glass towers that once seemed far beyond his reach. The plaque on the door read, "Head of Design Innovation," a title he still touched every morning, as if to remind himself it was real. The room smelled faintly of fresh leather and cedar from the shelves lined with prototypes. But the most important things were not new. On his desk, carefully placed where he could see them each day, sat his father's old work boots, scuffed and worn from years on the factory floor. Beside them lay his sketchbook, the same one he had carried through nights at bus stops and dim apartments. Its pages no longer hidden, but celebrated. Together they told the story of the road he had walked, from invisible janitor to visible visionary. The company had changed with him. Since the unveiling of his prototype, investors had poured money into new projects. The industry was buzzing with talk of Reeves Enterprises' sudden rise, and the CEO, who once dismissed him, now introduced him proudly at every major event. Yet for Darius, the true measure of success was not in stock prices or applause, it was in the people whose lives were beginning to shift because of doors he had pried open. He had convinced the board to fund a scholarship for young black designers from working-class backgrounds, a program named in honor of his father, Samuel Cole. The first class of recipients had already been chosen, students whose talent was undeniable but whose opportunities had been stolen by circumstance. They now had access to tuition, mentorship, and studio space, things Darius himself had once begged for in vain. Reporters had come to his office that morning to photograph the program's launch, but when the cameras turned off, Darius sat alone for a moment, his hand resting on the work boots. He remembered the nights his father had returned home with tired eyes and cracked hands, telling him, "You were born to build things, son." He remembered the sting of rejection, the weight of eviction notices, the humiliation of being laughed at in rooms where he did not belong. Those memories no longer haunted him, they grounded him, reminding him of the price of silence and the power of persistence. Outside his office, employees who once passed him without a glance now greeted him with respect. Some asked for advice, others simply wanted to shake his hand. The laughter that had once dismissed him had been replaced with acknowledgement, even admiration. But Darius never forgot that recognition meant little if it stopped with him. His mission was larger now, to make sure no other hidden talent stayed buried in the shadows. As the sun climbed higher, he opened his sketchbook to a blank page. His pencil moved steadily, shaping new lines, new visions, knowing each one could spark another breakthrough. Legacy, he realized, was not about being seen once. It was about ensuring others would never again be invisible. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.